Canzano. I appreciate you making this podcast part of your day. Make sure you subscribe if you want more and leave us some feedback. Away we go.
Initialize sequence.
Welcome to The Baldcast, a production of John Canzano's Bald-Faced Truth.
We've got so many people that are holding, that want to get on the show, talk about what's going on. We are 2 hours away from the Arizona Board of Regents meeting. Will they announce in their Board of Regents meeting that they're leaving the conference? Arizona State? Will one of them announce they're leaving? Will neither announce? Will they never even get there? Will the Pac-12 come out in the next 2 hours and say, hey, we've got a deal? And what about 8 o'clock tonight? University of Washington set to meet their trustees at 8 o'clock. I think it's very intentional how they've lined this up. I want your phone calls, so Matt and Tom and Ace and Paul and Mike, all hang on. I'll get to you here. But I want you to know this is not the first time a major sports conference in the Pacific time zone has been under fire. I would call it an Amber Alert at this point. The Pacific Coast Conference. You remember it? Cal, Oregon, USC, UCLA, Montana, Idaho, Oregon State, Washington, Stanford, Washington State. You remember this? That conference? Here to talk about that conference and what we can learn from it, Mark Schipper, who runs a website called Fifth Down College Football. He goes on the road, he tells stories, he uncovers some of the history. He's joining us here. Mark, how are you, man?
What's up, John? I'm doing great. How are you doing today? It's wild times in the West again.
I'm ready to get a good night's sleep again, but this really isn't about me. But, yes, that's what I'm ready for. But did I set that up nicely? Like this isn't the first time this has happened, or this isn't the first time a conference has been under fire?
Yeah, you definitely did. From 1956 to 1959, the PCC, the Pacific Coast Conference, which is the direct forerunner of the Pac-12 we have today, they all claim the same records, went up in flames. It disintegrated, it broke down, it ceased operation, and it rebuilt as the thing we know today.
Is there anything we can learn from that time, or anything that jumps out from you is that from that era that has a parallel to what we're seeing today with George Kliavkoff and media rights and Larry Scott's tenure? You know, was there a precursor to the PCC's downfall that you can say, oh yeah, this is history repeating?
Yeah, there definitely is. There are a whole bunch of things, but let's just start with the league commissioner and the way they had him operate the conference. It was an extremely strict conference for scholarships, an extremely strict conference for work pay. It essentially was an intensely amateur conference. And the problem with that is that they were also playing big-time football. So the PCC CEO group of the time, they didn't call it that, essentially hamstrung their own league, caused them to make less revenue, made it more difficult to recruit, talked about things like dropping out of the Rose Bowl, banning spring practice. The heart of it is they didn't center football. They didn't make football first and second of their athletic departments, and it caused the league, with a bunch of schools with different aspirations, to crack up based on disagreements. In many ways, it is a slightly different circumstances, but a direct parallel to what's happening today out west.
I am watching what is happening today, and literally, you know, it could be that the Pac-12 is holed up now, trying to get the votes, trying to get the grant of rights signed. Was there that kind of angst at that time in the late 1950s as the PCC was facing extinction?
Yeah, absolutely there was, and there's one major difference. So the similar thing is the major football powers in Los Angeles, at that time football powers in the Bay Area, and the University of Washington out of Seattle. That's another interesting thing about the West Coast, is its power centers historically have been in urban areas. That's not normal in college football. In college football, these are generally college towns in rural areas. So that's an interesting thing about the scheme out west. But what they had was different ceilings that they saw for each other. The football powers saw the big stage, major college football, Well, schools like Oregon, Oregon State, Washington State, and at that time Idaho saw a much lower ceiling and wanted to bring the big powers down to their level. Now, the major difference today is Oregon, what nobody could have forecasted back then, has become a football power out of the rural north and has become a major disruptor in this process.
We're talking to Mark Schipper, who is a historian and reporter. Fifth Down College Football is his website. We've had him on the show before. I'm a big believer that we should study our history. I don't know that a lot of the fans across the footprint are aware of this kind of stuff. They should read what you have on your website. But you had, before television, back when stadium gate receipts were critical at the time. Who was the powerhouse? Who was the tentpole of that conference at that time?
Oh, it was UCLA, USC, and the University of Washington. And then the Bay Area schools, Stanford and Cal, cared a lot more about that time, and they had 70,000-seat stadiums and drew a lot more fans, played in Rose Bowls, and they had their issues with the big-time game for certain. But the conference was anchored in Los Angeles, USC, UCLA. So when you're hearing a lot of this angst out of the Los Angeles schools, particularly USC, for the University of Oregon, this goes back to that era when Oregon attempted to hamstring Los Angeles, whereas now Oregon can recruit Los Angeles, and Northern California is wide open because Stanford and Cal have dropped out. So, those are the dynamics we're looking at today.
It's funny that you could go back that far and trace kind of the Oregon, USC, UCLA dynamic to going back that far. I think that's really interesting, Mark. And as you look at this, too, I think we're all kind of eager to have this be over. But did the conference come out of that PCC era and the breakdown of the PCC in a better place? What was the bridge to today, and how did we get to where the Pac-12 is?
Yeah, eventually it came out a lot better, and it turned into the crown jewel of the West, the powerhouse league that was Big Ten, Pac-8, Pac-10, Pac-12, and SEC. Those were the three kingpin leagues. But it took time, John. In 1959, when the league reformed, they first called themselves the Athletic Association of Western Universities. That became the Pac Conference. They did not allow Oregon in. It was a five-team league. It was USC, UCLA, Stanford, Cal, and Washington. Wazoo, Oregon State, and Oregon were left out. So that may sound familiar. They made Oregon wait 5 years before they let them come back in the league, and it was all punishment for the way Oregon had acted during the scandal. They had a law dean named Orlando Hollis. He referred to Los Angeles as a cesspool. He led the charge against LA, and he helped bring down the worst penalties in PCC and really NCAA history at that time on the LA schools and the Bay schools. So Cal only, not Stanford. So Oregon was in the doghouse for a long time, and those feelings, well, they're not as intense and they're for different reasons today, carry through right to our time.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of look at the parallels of that and see the history kind of come full circle. Mark Schipper with us, fifthdowncollegefootball.com if you want to check him out. Look, I know that you get into history. I know that, you travel around, you find great stories. Give me an idea of why a story like this appeals to you. Why write about this?
Well, it appeals to me because it's like that shock of recognition when you go back and look at this and you say, there's a kind of almost blinding obsession with the new and the current. And the fact is everything that's happening now is foundationed in the past. And so it's very enlightening to go back and read this and watch what the different generations saw and went through and how we either learned some of those lessons and didn't. As I watched this amazing football conference and athletic conference out west break apart and think, how could this possibly happen? I go back to the middle of the 20th century and watch it happen for the first time and see these dynamics, these relationships, these population centers. My whole contention is college football in particular is deeply tied to American history and culture, to regionalism, to the land, to the people. And all this stuff, it's still in play today. So new technology, different landscape, but it's all kind of as it's always been.
There was kind of a scandal back then, too, right? There was a slush fund in Seattle. There was, somebody had said, who coaches that team? Al Capone. There was, a lot of that in 1937 Rose Bowl, Washington was playing Pitt.
Right. Yeah. No, there was a major scandal. That's what caused the conference to crack up. And the fascinating thing, the reason the guy I mentioned earlier, Orlando Hollis from Oregon, one of the reasons Oregon was so set on punishing the big schools in the urban centers was that scandal had started at Oregon in 1951. Their coach, Fred Aiken, caught paying to recruit, paying players on his team, and he famously said, listen, I can either cheat and hope I don't get caught or not cheat and lose all these games and get fired because every other team in this league is doing the same thing. So Fred Aiken was pushed out. Oregon was upset about it. 5 years later, cut to 56. The scandal starts at Washington. It quickly spreads to Los Angeles. USC, UCLA have major booster funds going. And Oregon gets their chance at vengeance at the big schools in the South. So that's it was a national scandal, by the way, because the PCC, like the Pac-12 today, was very intent on academics, amateurism, non-commercialism. We do things the right way on the West Coast. And then it turned out they had these massive slush funds going for players, which they did because they couldn't give out athletic scholarships. So you had all the hypocrisy of college sports, all the bizarre decisions being made by schools that shouldn't have been made. And yeah, it was a major scandal.
I love your website. For people who want to check it out, fifthdowncollegefootball.com. Mark Schipper, our guest. Before I cut you loose, you have a story on there. It's off subject, but it's Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway, did he write about Notre Dame and USC as a rivalry?
Yeah, he did very, very early on. He had a story called The Gambler, the Nun, and the Radio. And it's about a writer who was injured out in Wyoming, and he has an extended stay in a Catholic hospital. And the sort of mother superior there loves Notre Dame football, and he listens, and he gets radio broadcasts from the coast in the evenings, and he ends up listening to the 1930 USC Notre Dame game. Now, famously, that ended up being Newt Rockne's final game he ever coached. They smoked USC in the Coliseum. They won the national title. 7 months later, Rockne dies in a plane crash. But Hemingway used Notre Dame, USC in this story, and it's a wonderful illustration of how prominent college football has been in our culture and country for a long time.
Appreciate you, Mark Schipper, college football expert and historian. Thank you for joining us. Good stuff, good history to see how, all of this, you got to learn from it, as they say, and otherwise you're doomed to repeat it. Sometimes you repeat it anyway.